Good morning and welcome to GM Tips. This is GM Rick coming back at you in the same week. This is my twofers. I do my twofers most weeks when I'm doing a GM tip. So this is my second one. And this title on this one is going to be Rewarding Great Role Play. And I think that's really all of us as GMs want our players to have great role play. We encourage it, we tell them, we say, we want them to build up a backstory and really role play their characters and do great things when it comes to building a character. So, one of the things we got to do as a GM or a DM, depending on which systems you're running, is reward the role play. And so often I think there are systems that encourage role play very heavily and do a great job of it and reward for it. And then there are other systems like Pathfinder and um, Dungeons and Dragons and D20 systems that don't necessarily reward great role play. You get rewards for killing monsters or defeating bad guys or defeating NPCs, depending on their challenge rating. But we always don't encourage the great role play. And I think there's a lot of ways you can reward great role play when it comes to working with people and allowing them to role play. And by the way, Lilo and Stitch in the background too for mini GM, so she lets Dad do things. But we'll see how we do with that. So a couple ways you can reward great role play. I think number one, you have to set a precedence that you will reward great role play. From the very beginning, you've got to let your players know that this is a role playing campaign, that you want them to role play things out, that you will reward creativity and different ways of solving things that don't always necessarily result in combat, though combat isn't a bad thing. It just maybe you don't always want them to combat everything they come up against. And so you reward them differently if they think outside the box. And players sometimes grump and growl when one player gets more experience awards than the other or some other type of reward. Keep in mind you're setting a precedence when you do this. And what you got to do is really streamline that process by having with you ability to reward them. And this is where we come to that rewarding side of things. How do you reward a character? Is it always just XP and gold? Do you reward them always with a powerful magic item? What are the ways you do reward your players? And I think having a mix of material rewards, experience rewards, as well as other type of rewards is invaluable to really building a great campaign. So let's look at the non-material rewards first. We're going to go a little bit reverse of what normally we do. So we'll start out with XP. Experience points or advancement points, or however you want to call them in a system, uh, award points. I don't know. There's so many different things. Most times it's referred to as experience points because it comes from your experience. XP is the one way that GMs can really reward characters. Now, how do I reward my characters? I give them an extra couple hundred XP if they really think themselves outside of a box with a certain skill action or thoughtful process or verbal exchange or verbal joust. I will have some XP awards. Now, again, mind you, if you defeat a an NPC or a creature that you're battling or a trap, you get an XP reward for that. I do above and beyond that, especially if it's something unique. And again, I don't go thousands of experience points because really you don't want to just overinflate your characters jumping levels left and right. Um, but I do an XP reward, and it kind of defeats what some people do. Some people award advancement per session, so you get a half a point towards your next level per expansion or a quarter point. Doing this type of rewarding is not going to work well in that type of thing when it comes to XP. So this is, mind you, for those of you like me that still calculate the XP and crunch things. Fortunately, I've got a lot of tables, and that's one thing I would say. If you're going to award XP, have a challenge rating versus table award for how many players in a group. That I love that Paizo has done it that way. It makes it really easy to take a 10,000 experience point creature and divide it among five. It makes it real easy to do that. And I'll add, say, for a semi thoughtful response, I may award 75 to 100 experience points. For a really well thought out and well executed uh, solution to the situation, that's the best way I'm going to put it, I award more, maybe 250, 200, 250. It's a nice bump, especially at the low levels. It really gets you along. Now, you can adjust that down, especially for first and second level. You may not want to do that because it'll kick them to second level very quickly. So maybe you go 50, 75, 100. However you do it, you want to show your players that every time they think outside the box, you're going to get awards. Now, you got to stay on your toes and make notes of this as you go along. So having a notepad there is always important to have. So then you can put down character's name or player's name and award. And you don't have to give it to them right then and there at the end of the resolution. But when you calculate up your experience, you want to make sure you really emphasize that. Now, if a player comes back and challenges it and say, well, I came up with a pretty thoughtful idea, you don't have to necessarily tell them, no, no, you didn't. You can still award them some experience, maybe not as much as the really well thought out person, but you can give them something because really you want to encourage the behavior. It's a carrot stick type of approach in doing things, but it really works out pretty well. And I think even making a table for yourself of what these XP awards. In fact, that's something that I may do myself. Um, because again, that way then you're not just pulling them out your rear end when you're doing it with them. You really are thoughtfully going down and figuring out what it would be to help them advance. And you want to do that. I think it really sets a precedence. It makes it fun. It really gets your players to think outside the box. So XP is one type of non-material reward. Boons. Boons are another type of reward. So a boon might be, I will owe you a favor, or it will help with the next roll with that person. So you get a +1 locally in town, maybe to influence people that the people awarded the boon to you from. Or it may be prestige points or fame and fortune. You want to reward them in such a way that it has an impact, that it impacts their roles, that it impacts their discoveries, that it impacts the influence they have. That is always important. And sometimes that's a very glossed over reward because think about it. What's the one thing as a player and as a character you want to have is influence. If you can influence others, if it's easier to influence others, it makes your job easier when it comes to walking through a campaign to the ultimate goal. And that's really something that I think you got to look at and there's some examples. In fact, look up boons and banes for different systems. And they'll tell you some really good ones that will match your system. If you don't have one in your system, pick the system closest to yours and convert it. In fact, you may want to even come up with a boon bane table because I think that when you look at things, you can have a generic boon bane table, and banes are things that you do wrong. So if you really whiff your rolls and how well you're doing, that can be a bane, something that's not so good. So boons and banes, and those are a very valuable reward system. I'll give you an example. So a minor duke of a count in a local county, you do a favor for them. You have a favorable influence role on what you've done to help them along with their ultimate goal by accomplishing a task. You go in there and you really do well at accomplishing that task. So now, instead of rewarding you gold, that noble turns around and says, look, I will give you one request of me the next time you're in town. And you emphasize to the player it's not necessarily I want a magic item, I want something to heal me or this, that. But maybe it's I'd like to be able to go to the market and have maybe a little less difficulty in selling an item. I'd like to get a little more for it. And he goes, done. So he goes to the local merchant on your behalf and says, hey, look, you will owe me a favor because I will then influence how well your shop does in this town. That gets the shopkeeper listening. So then the shopkeeper is told, I want you, instead of haggling them down to 60% of the value of the item, you will give them 85% of the value of that item. Okay, so he's only making 15% profit. But he's willing to do it because that gives him the influence of that local duke in the area with his shop. So he gives you that one time at 85% buy. So that's really good for you, especially if you come in with an item of some very large value. Then you really get the reward from it. Or maybe you get a great trade value on an item you want to buy. So you really want to do that. Bug, you need to not get upset. If you're going to get upset at the Lilo and Stitch, I'm turning it off. Okay? Okay, Janet? Mornings with Mini GM. So, sorry, you get to hear all kinds of fun things on the cast. So basically, that's another way you can reward them. Other ways you can reward them, maybe with a title or land or a building or a base of operation. There's different ways you can reward a player. And when you think about that, it's somewhat material, but it's really not. It's a title, it's an area, it's influence. Again, something very different from giving them a magic item or gold or something like along those lines. Again, it gives them maybe a place to operate that they would have had to pay rent for that now is rent free because of what they've done to help out a local noble or a local influential person, or maybe somebody that owns that home that wants to rent out part of that home, but then says, look, because of all you've done for our community, we're going to do this free of charge. And that becomes your base of operations. That's invaluable to a party sometimes. So again, you can do different types of rewards like this, and keep that in mind when you're doing the rewarding of role play. These are the kind of things that are unique, different, that really excite your players and give them a little bit more influence when it comes to what they're doing. So these are some of the non-material things. Other non-material things, maybe it's a blessing from a priest or a spell cast on them, or a god or goddess awards them with an ability for several hours that enhances what they're able to do and who they're able to influence. You can do rewards like that as well, that you're getting a reward from their deity or they're getting a reward otherwise for the role play. So keep this in mind as you're doing these type of things. Do creative and unique rewards that make the party players want to role play all the more as you go along. Now, again, you can reward them with magic items if you choose to, and that's fine. Maybe some potions, some scrolls, other type of material rewards, or you can give them gems, jewelry, other types of valuables, or gold. You can set up any of these type of rewards for roleplay. I wouldn't suggest doing a lot of material because what you're going to do is you're going to enhance them and get them very rich very quick, and then it's going to skew things in the roleplay. So keep in mind, you don't want to go overboard. You want to do little bits of carrots and sticks if they really fail, but nothing really destructive. You're not here to really hurt your players. Great example. One of the people came on to one of the Facebook sites that I'm on, and he was talking about a situation where he had a dog where they wrote a letter, and if they sent it back to the merchant would send them back then what they needed. It was their way to go into town. They could put money in there, do whatever they had to do, and do an exchange. Well, one of the things he brought up is the fact that this is a small town and the people aren't very literate, especially farmers. And one of the people that they sent the dog to was a farmer. So in order for him to read their note, he would have to go to the village, go to a barrister, have the barrister read it, kind of hash it out from what it meant, and then they missed their timeline or time frame that they were trying to get these items for to solve the adventure. Don't undercut your players, please. I know, look, reality, we all want reality in there. Okay, what is the chance that a commoner can read at any level? Very low in a feudal society. Very low. They know a spoken language, and even that's very limited. They probably didn't get much school. They probably don't know how to read. In fact, most interactions are probably done by looking at pictographs and going this, this, and this. Okay? But don't penalize the party because of this. Don't make them have to go to, I'm going to draw you pictographs and try to figure this out. And then bane them because they didn't do it in the time frame necessary. I know where he was coming from with it and what he asked. And I appreciate him asking. It was a great GM DM thing to ask, but it's a great example in showing boon and bane and rewards. Don't put in so many gotchas in your story that you're going to make it hard for your players to roleplay. I think it's great that they have a dog they can send back with a note and gold and get the things they need, because gee, otherwise they're remote and they can't get those items. And that's tough enough, sending the dog and hoping he doesn't die, which that's something you can put in there, is the dog could die along the way, going back and forth. But don't just sabotage every effort to make it more realistic. We do want realism. As GMs, we do want balance, but don't penalize like that. It just doesn't go well, and your players are going to get upset, and you're really going to chase them off by doing this. What you want to do is you want to put enough challenge in there that makes them think outside the box, but not so much that you destroy. Because look, let's be honest. I say most everybody in my campaigns, whether they're poor or rich, is literate. Okay, that probably isn't realistic, but it saves times for me as a GM having to really go through and say who's literate and who's not, and can they really read what you're showing them, or are they just that dense that when they look at that they're going, nope, have no clue what those little characters on that page mean. And I don't want to do that. That's just way too challenging some days. And we have enough challenges creating a great story, a great everything else, tying in people's backstories. So don't sabotage yourself in doing this. Now, other ways to to give great role play is you can set situations and set different circumstances so that role play really happens. So you set up an encounter that combat will actually be a negative to the player. And that it really kind of gives them the choice, okay, if I go combat, that's the easy road out, and I'm not going to get much for it. So I really need to be much more thoughtful and creative in what I do. Again, I wouldn't do this with every encounter and every place of your campaign, but in certain cases you can, and it really forces them to be much more conscious of how they solve things. Running through and as the term goes, being murder hobos doesn't work everywhere. In fact, in some cases, it really sets you up for disaster. And people are like, well, you just want to kill my player off. No, not really. The realism is you go to the well too many times with the same, action on how to deal with things. You're going to hit a brick wall. And that's just the reality of life. And you can make it somewhat realistic in your campaign without going overboard and taking away the fantasy and the fun. Keep that in mind. You really want to develop and design situations and scenarios where the characters come upon things that they have to solve or resolve or get the aid of somebody. And you really set it up in such a way that it becomes a social interaction, or it becomes a set of roles with social interaction. In some cases, if the PC's explanation is great enough, you can even give them an enhancement on their role so they don't blow it. And that's something that a lot of GMs don't do, I think. The player comes up with such a great solution and then rolls that one, and you're going, oh my lord, and that was a great solution. You can choose as a GM to overrule the roll. I don't suggest doing it all the time because you still want rolls to count and you don't want them always going, well, come on, you helped me the last time. You may have an intervention because it was so great and an inspiration hits. Maybe a deity influenced something, maybe something happened and that roll succeeded where it would fail. Or you give them a re-roll and say, you know what? Take the best or the worst of those two rolls. In this case, I'd say the best. And if if it stands, it stands. At least you've given them that opportunity and saying, you know what, that was such a great dialogue. I don't want you to just automatically lose it. So roll again. I really feel like I'm going to give you a double roll because you really thought that one out really well. And then again, it encourages them. It's another reward. It's a non-material reward where you give them an additional roll. That can be used as well as in place of other things. And sometimes that's even more valuable than all the magic items in the world or all the gold in the world, because that's the thing that keeps that storyline from ending right then and there. Now, you can still have a blown roll be humorous and fun, and yet still turn out for the good. And so keep that in mind. You may play it up the other way is, geez, you blew that roll so badly. The guy is just looking at you like you have three heads and then takes pity on you and says, I think you really meant to take me this way. And because you just really screwed that up so badly, I can't help but feel sympathetic to you. And I'm going to give you what you need anyways, just because, God, that was so horrible. And yet I can relate because I had an experience in my life where it was so horrible. And everybody just looked at me like I had three heads, and I'm not going to do that to you. So keep that in mind. You can do that too. There's a lot of ways, and that's why I say don't limit yourself as a GM or a DM. Really be creative in the ways that you encourage great role play. Because I think more than anything else, you want to come up with some unique ideas that lead people to really want to role play things well and really want to be successful. Now, I will say this with great role play, there's always those that are resistant of it. And at some point, you got to say to yourself, there are some people that are hack and slash, or like a strong combat, or like a strong combat strategy. So don't limit your campaign to where you don't have any of those. Even if it's a social combat campaign, give a couple scenarios where that player can really work out their angst with combat and that you can get it out of them and out of their system and reward them for it. And you can get them to think outside the box in the combat situation to where they're rewarded for great combat role play as well. Maybe they set up a contraption that takes down a bad person or a trap or some sort of thing that they really thought outside the box that doesn't kill the bad guy, but really just puts them in a place, or the good guy. It really just puts them in a place of where they have to negotiate then with the party. They're forced to. And that's not a bad thing either. You can reward them for not killing that encounter and just really coming up with a plan to entrap them and force them to the table. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's great role play. And you want to reward that as well. So don't limit and take away all combat because you've got a player that loves combat. Let them have some of that fun. I've got one in my party. He lives for combat. It is his, even though he loves the story, that combat and that conflict of physical conflict is his energizer. And so I try to come up with ways to allow for that without killing and penalizing the rest of the party who is much more skill based. Excuse me. I try to do a little bit of both. I've been up since 3 a.m. So yeah, I'm going to yawn a little on you. So really, there's a lot of ways you can do this. And I'm just trying to get your creative juices going as a GM and a DM. Really think, Miss GM, Mr. DM, about how you really want to do things with her or him, the player. And yeah, I'm exercising my her first. Ladies, big props, putting you first. Um, really make sure that you do that and that you really take the time to think out those rewards. Plan them ahead. Plan the encounter ahead. Write them out on a piece of paper. Have them ready to go. Have different scenarios. And even if they don't hit the right scenario, have that wiggle room that you can say, okay, it kind of fits into this one, so I'll work with this, and reward that role play. Play it up. Talk it up in the group. Make it a talking point after the session or during a break. Wow, that was really pretty awesome what you did there. I don't know how you thought of that, but I really like that. It really makes your players feel like they are important and part of things. Right, Mini GM? Tell them, right? Yeah, that's what she says. I got to get that little interaction. See, I gave her a prop because she's playing around doing things and wants Dad to look at her. So that's kind of one of those things you got to make sure you're rewarding everybody, right, Janet? Right. So, Mini GM thinks so. But yeah, again, I used to be the type of GM that just gave XP awards for combat or resolution of a conflict. And I came to find that, you know what? I encourage much more role play when I came up with the unique rewards and awards. And you could even have maybe an award system each session where you say, the player with the best role play, I've got this 20-sided dice that's brand new that I bought. I'm going to award that to that player. There you go. Now there's a fun thing. And I even thought about that one. So let's do a reward of dice. I like that. See, while I'm sitting there brainstorming with you guys, I come up with some new juicy ideas. So what you do is you set that up and really get that going to where the player has I'm sorry, reminder went out from my work for I'm doing a training here coming up for batteries, so I've got that coming up. But just really come up with ideas like that. Maybe you do a new dice, a new 20-sided, a new 6-sided, one of the cool new colors or types, or maybe you even go for the ultimate campaign. Say at the end, whoever has the most unique solutions, I'm going to give this metal 20-sided, which cost me $15 to that player. Now, I'm not saying to do it all the time because, let's face it, we GMs are kind of money tight sometimes too. But spending a couple dollars to encourage role play, especially when you're having issues, may be the way to go. And again, sometimes those physical rewards are all the more important for that player. And it says to them that you do take into account what they're doing and you really do want to reward it. So that's another way to go, is you can have rewards and awards every other session, every 4 sessions, every 5 sessions, where whoever had the most creative ideas and creative solutions, and you keep a tally as a GM, gets the award of this dice. And that's a pretty cool thing, or a dice bag, or dice case, or maybe a new miniature. Something that's really cool that gets them going, yeah, I really want that. That's a pretty cool award. And so those kind of things are really good as well. I think that's it. My 3 pieces of advice: number 1, don't just reward in material rewards like gold and money. Don't make every reward an XP for non-material things. It can be other things, but you can reward individual XP. I'd put together a table for that, for certain unique actions or solutions. And then number 3, you can do an outside the game award. So something with the gaming equipment or along those lines, to where you really help the player of that, all the players to rise up and really become the shining gems, but one of those players to really get an extra special reward for thinking outside the box. Love these kind of ideas. I love it. And if you guys have got some ideas too, please post them up on the YouTube site underneath so other people can read them. Also post them up in the groups. I think we get some real great dialogue, and that's the way I really want these videos to be. I don't want these just to be me telling you what to do. I want to invoke your juices so that you're going, yeah, here's some ideas, because you're going to give me ideas. And I love that kind of reciprocation. I really do, where I'm getting as much out of it as you are when you're watching these. So let's really have some great dialogue on this, especially when we come up with these situations. And you younger GMs and DMs pipe in too, because sometimes a fresh mind has some of the best ideas. Thanks again. Have a great week. This is part 2 of my GM tips, my 2 tips a week. I hope you have a tremendously fun week of gaming. Thanks again.